Next, we have your ask around for. I think this was the last one you did. I thought this was a really great one. Penn State's best evaluations in 2025, a class that everyone kind of talks down. If we're being honest about the way that Penn State fans and generally this conversation has gone around the class of 2025, it's that this is not a class filled with stars and kind of meeting the expectation of the other classes previous. Yet there are some really good evaluations in this class, and you both picked a favorite and explained why. So if it's come back to you, who was your pick of best evaluation in your mind for the class of 2025?
So when you talk best evaluation, you're not necessarily talking best player. You're talking about how did you find this guy? Why did you find this guy? When did you find this guy? And how do you think it's gone since then? Because we saw some early evaluation. I mean, Penn State's first 4 commits in the 2025 are now gone. And I would say 2.5 of those to 3 of those, nobody's like worried about it. Like it's my way of saying that they're okay without those guys. When you go look back last fall, I mean, Greater Latrobe on nobody's radar. Like it's a school in Western Pennsylvania that doesn't churn out prospects, but in October, Penn State offered Alex Tatsch, and they were one of the first offers to get there. I think, and I look at some of the other schools that recruit and evaluate pretty well. Marshall's one of them. He had offers from UConn and Marshall this time last summer. Like that's pretty interesting to me. Charles Huff's done a heck of a job. Actually, just talking to Brian Doan about that a little bit, but they know what they're looking at down there, so that's a good sign. And then Penn State looked at his tape. They didn't have numbers on him, which they don't often move on that, but they felt good enough about him to go, and they're glad they did because they got numbers on him this summer. They were really, really good. So I'm very curious to see how he goes when he's full bore healthy. He's not. He's not put on a ton of weight, which is a good thing because I think he was up to 225 at some point. Now he's probably about big. 215. So he's trimmed down a bit, and I think they're going to be pretty good this year. That team, so it's going to be fun to watch them come together. I know they've got another linebacker that's not as high in terms of the rankings, but he's a good player as well. John Wetzel committed to Marshall. I think that's something worth watching there. But I think Penn State did a really good job, and I know. It seemed like a bit of a layup at the time because he didn't have a huge offer list or anything like that. I know Notre Dame came on with an offer shortly before he committed, but that's not necessarily what we're looking at in terms of valuation. This is a guy that's continued to go up, and I know we have him extremely high on 3, but everybody else seems to be catching up and going in that direction. So in a class where we haven't seen kind of what we're used to in guys that just continue to climb after they commit. Tasch is one of those guys. So I think it's been a really good evaluation. Whether it was Manny, whether it was the rest of the staff, I think it's a really good evaluation. I know Tom Allen's pretty happy to have Alex Tatsch.
Yeah, and the way he runs and moves in space, I don't think he's the fastest guy in the world, but he moves really well, and he does have a good closing burst. Ryan, any thoughts? I know you are one of our experts on the Western State recruiting as well, in terms of the teams you cover of the Monty Christian stuff. I feel like you were very early on that stuff. So just your thoughts on this particular situation with getting Alex Tatsch and how the linebacker room played out after that. And how he's been kind of a centrifuge that you feel comfortable with, and all the other things that have happened around it in the class of 2025.
Sean's gonna be mad at me for this, but I'm gonna call him Dan Connor Jr. Ooh. Am I going a little too far? Maybe a little too far with that. Okay.
I mean,
I love him.
Wasn't Specca Dan Connor Jr. last year? So it's like the Kyle Hamilton thing at Notre Dame.
Okay. I guess.
Reproducing
Fair.
Dan Connors here, which actually would be a pretty good strategy. But
Alex has a little bit more size, like just build-wise, he fits that a little bit more than Specca. But, hey, by the way, real quick, Andy, his younger brother, picked up a West Virginia offer, 2026 guy. We'll see. Safety prospect. We'll see where things go. But, no, Alex Tatsch is a great player. I hope his shoulder holds up. That's the big thing I'll be watching for this year. Right. Linebacker, shoulders. Not an injury that you want if you're a linebacker. So he got his shoulder fixed. Obviously, let's hope it all holds up this year and he's able to progress and that's not a reoccurring injury, but I've seen quite a few times where it can be, especially at such a physical position. So that's really what I'll be watching for, because I have no doubts about athletically and how he's able to read the field and all that he'll be just fine down the road. As far as my pick, Matt Henderson, tight end, is where I went with that. This is pretty similar, I think, to Tatsch's situation where he wasn't even ranked when Penn State offered him. He had Michigan State offer, but everything else was non-Power 5. Penn State offers on April 25th, and sure enough, Maryland, Pitt, Virginia Tech, boom, 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 all offer within the coming days, which I think we've seen that story so many times, especially at the tight end position. Obviously, schools recognize that Penn State has a really good eye for that stuff, but runs a 4.6, had a 31-foot broad. I mean, this is a guy who's 6'5", 210. I mean, there's a lot of size there and some really good athletic numbers that I think Penn State's going to try and take advantage of over the coming years. But I mean, it's a little similar to Luke Reynolds. He's not going to end up on the Luke Reynolds, as high as Luke ended up being. But there's also a reason why On3 does have him as part of their On 300, where I don't think any of the other 3 sites do. So he mainly played receiver last year. I think he'll probably be still playing quite a bit receiver this year as well. But from I don't want to say a smaller school in Powhatan, because they actually play some good competition. It's a smaller school as far as enrollment, but they play like the Manchesters and the LC Birds and some really good schools down in that way. So we're going to see them go up against a handful of guys that'll play at least one AA or some of them will play FBS level. And just watching his progression this year. But give Ty Howell a lot of credit for that. He came up early. Noticed his potential at camp. I believe it was as a sophomore, I want to say, Sean, and then just kind of kept chipping away at that recruitment. Kept an eye on him, and sure enough, once he was able to see him during the spring eval, which is actually the contact period now, but I still will call it the spring eval period. He made a very quick move to offer, and now I think he's probably one of the more high floor prospects in this class, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. He's a guy that catches you off.
Yeah.
He catches you off guard with how big he is, because I don't know what it is, but he doesn't look necessarily 6'5". He doesn't look necessarily as big as he is, and then you see him in person and he's huge. Like, he's as every big as the other tight ends that they've recruited recently. Again, the context here of getting Matt Henderson, finding that player, knowing that Penn State was in with a lot of the top tight ends and it didn't really go their way with some of those national prospects, but to have Matt Henderson in the back pocket, how important is that, Fitz, to keep a strength on your roster like that?
Yeah, I mean, no one's too worried about it. Like, they think that Henderson can fit in that room, and that's a high bar to fit in there. So that's the direction you go with it. Obviously, Andrew Olish, you want to keep him home if you're Penn State, and that did not work out in that situation. Beyond that, there's not much to say. But Penn State's happy with Henderson. They think he can blossom into a guy that can be one of those guys. And by the way, Ryan, you misspoke. You said Luke Reynolds earlier. It's touchdown king Luke Reynolds from camp. So
yes.
Should have read that story last night when it popped on my feed.
I guess so. Greg's all over it as usual. But no, I mean, it's hey, give them benefit of the doubt when it comes to tight ends. You're not going to hit them all, but they've hit quite a bit.